this helped me so much. I played with my dad and we were able to talk through some of these topics that, we hadn't been able to before. Um, my mom finally made her funeral plans. I've been trying to get her to do that forever. And I brought it into my favorite wine bar here in the LA area. And this young couple said, "Oh, can you give us like a handful of questions we want to kind of go away and talk about?" So they took some of the cards and then they said, "Oh my God. Okay, so we've been putting off doing our trust because we were fighting over who to give guardianship of our kid." And so they had come to a decision after like one of the
Wow.
cards prompted them. And then there just happened to be an estate attorney like sitting there at the bar who was like, "Oh, are you interested?"
I'll give you my card right now. I'll meet with you Monday.
They ended up like making an appointment with this guy. They had known each other. So, yeah, that felt really good because I got to see it all unfold.
Wow.
Usually it's like after the fact, people will, shoot me an email or something and tell me that the card helped them with their family. But that was like action happening.
Hi there, grief growers. I am so grateful to be here with you as always. If you've been growing alongside me in my work for a while, welcome back. And if you are new to me and my work, hello. My name is Shelby Forsythia. I am a grief coach, a 3-time author, and the founder of Life After Loss Academy, which is an online course and community that has helped dozens of grieving people stop feeling lost, broken, alone in their grief, and start building lives that they genuinely love from the lives that loss forced them to live. Here on Grief Grower, we know that loss includes not only death-related losses, which is what most people think of when they think of grief, but also losses like divorce and breakup, major diagnosis, and every other loss or transition that changes your life. Here on the show, we believe that grief is not something we get over. It is something that we grow with and alongside, and that when we stop treating grief like a problem to be solved and start treating it like an invitation to live more deeply, we create meaningful lives that are rich with the memories that we carry, all of the struggles that we faced, and the preciousness of what it is to be right here, right now. Today on the show, I am bringing you my conversation with Lisa Pahl, the creator of the Death Deck, the End of Life Deck, and the Dementia Deck, all card games for starting conversations around life's hardest moments. Together, we talk about why learning more in grief is never a sign of failure, how playing cards can help you start hard conversations about end of life and death, and how identifying as a learner can help you grow through grief. And I'll mention this again at the end of the episode, but if you'd like to get 20% off of any of Lisa's card decks, you can enter the code GRIEF20, GRIEF 20, on her website, and I will provide a link to that in the show notes for this episode. Here's Lisa's formal bio. Lisa Pahl is CEO of the Death Deck, a company that creates tools to inspire meaningful conversations on what matters most in our lives and in our deaths. As a licensed clinical social worker accredited in hospice and palliative care with almost 2 decades of experience in hospice and 7 years in emergency medicine, Lisa helps people cope with illness, dying, and grief. Lisa is also an expert contributor for Help Texts, which provides expert grief and mental health support via text messages. She is also a volunteer with the Humane Prison Hospice Project, which provides palliative care training and support for incarcerated individuals. With a passionate belief that peace at the end begins with meaningful conversations over time, Lisa engages people in talking about and preparing for this important stage of life. Lisa, thank you so much for coming on Grief Grower today. I am so delighted to have you. And I think for people who don't know you, we were talking off mic of like, some people are famous to us in our heads, and then we can't believe other people don't know who they are. And you are one of those people for me. So for people who have never interacted with you or heard of the Death Deck, the End of Life Deck, the Dementia Deck, tell us a bit about your loss story and how you got into creating card decks for life's most difficult conversations.
Yeah, well, I'm excited to be here with you, Shelby. And I, my loss story, it's interesting because I would say my loss story actually occurred after the creation of the decks. So in 2018, we created the Death Deck, and I created it with Lori Lo Cicero. And Lori had lost her husband. He died in his early 40s. And I was the hospice social worker that was supporting her through that process. And so we came together to try to create something that could help people have important conversations before a medical crisis or a terminal diagnosis. And so at the time, I had had a lot of experience with within hospice, supporting people from a professional viewpoint. And I had had grandparents die, but I hadn't been intimately involved in anyone's care or, a loss that just devastated me. And it was my first loss of that nature was my mother-in-law, Kay. She called me her daughter in love, and we had a really special relationship. And she died in August of 2020, um, in the height of COVID. My husband and I were taking turns flying back and forth from California to stay with her, um, while our son was younger and needed one of us here in California. So we were back and forth to Michigan. And she taught me so much. I mean, she just like, I had all these ideas going into it that I was, this grief informed person, and I understood death and dying, and I was there to make this like the best death that ever occurred. And she taught me that that was ridiculous and egocentric.
Okay, thanks for your service.
It was a very humbling experience, and I really, um, I mean, I think about it so often, just the ways in which I, like many people in grief and in, you know, um, dealing with someone with a serious illness, the intention was good. I was thinking, I I know all of these amazing legacy projects that we could do. You know, um, I want to make sure we know everything about everything that you want as you're dying. And and I really wanted her to make some videos for my son, for
Hmm.
my husband, and it just wasn't, those weren't her priorities. She felt like her whole life had been telling people how she felt about them, and she felt really content with the relationships that she had had. And she really just wanted to visit with people and eat really good food and let each day unfold.
Hmm.
Whereas I was like, when are we going to do this video and all these things? So I think when she died, it was hard in the grief sense, but it was also hard in this like moment of, you know, I had I had wasted some time being stressed out about something that was my priority and not hers.
It's beautifully said.
And I think that that experience has shaped so much of how I try to show up now. um, everyone's dying experience, everyone's grief is is only theirs. And so we can't, I have my worldview and the information that I have, but like, so what? Like, so,
Yeah.
that doesn't mean
Wow.
anything to someone else, right? So yeah, I owe a lot to Kay in terms of, I mean, she taught me so many lessons through my life and then in her death. So I'm very grateful for her. She's actually the fuchsia plant here. So this tattoo is a memorial tattoo of all the favorite flowers in my life of people who have died, and she's the fuchsia. Um, and
Fantastic.
I stroke it as a like, you know, feeling close to her.
I love that. And fuchsias, To me, they look like little tiny ballerinas, like little colorful skirts, and then they don't pop open really till they're ready to pop open. They look like little raspberries on a dangling stick, and then suddenly they're just like pow, and they're so fun, just
They're
as
so fun. And
flowers.
they're such random colors. It's like this pink and purple, and
Hmm.
it it's nature. Yeah, there's. I forgot you're the flower girl, so of course you.
I can tell you a little bit about fuchsia. I love this like this doorway in to learning even more about grief, loss, death, and dying because you're like, I knew this stuff. I did it for work. I was adjacent to a friend and then co-founder's major loss, and then that resulted in this first deck of cards that you made together. But then you're like, and then I had my own, and then I realized there was more to learn.
Yeah.
And I think in grief sometimes we can see this message in front of our eyeballs of like, oh, you have more to learn as being a failure in some way, or that you didn't try hard enough, or you didn't know enough, or there was something wrong about the situation. But I wonder, looking back on it now, I know we're 6 years out, but how do you look back on it through an alternative lens?
Yeah, I mean, when you said that, what came to mind was I've had the opportunity to supervise social work interns and um, and then social workers who are getting their licensure. And one of the like criterias that we're evaluating social workers on is if they identify as learners. And so you're coming like instead of just thinking you already know everything. And and I think what I learned through that experience was that, that is true throughout life. And that if we identify as learners, as people who are curious, and we show up with curiosity and compassion and with a desire to learn, whether that's to learn about a person, to learn about, what they hope will happen as they're approaching end of life, or whether that's just to be open to possibilities of being wrong, being disproven sometimes with the ideas that I have. Like one of the common things is people always think, oh, it's better to die at home. And it's not always better to die at home. There are a lot of situations where that's just not, that wouldn't necessarily be the best thing,
Hmm.
um, determined by the dying person, even. And so I think when I look back, I realize that that was the little kick in the butt that I needed to really latch on to that idea of being a learner and being curious and constantly reading more books like your great book and learning from that. I mean, you can you can nerd out on grief. You can nerd out on
Hmm.
death, And I think that there's so much when we approach life that way as learners, open to that we know some things. There's a lot more to learn.
Yes, and thank you for taking that detour with me because it's a really beautiful reminder of like why this podcast exists in the first place. The first episode I ever did is like, what does it mean to be a grief grower? Because like, why are we calling ourselves this? What does it mean? And a big component of it is acknowledging that grief is a forever thing. It sticks with you. It looks different over time, but part of it as an identity, being a griever forever, is being willing to notice and be interested in, be curious about, to your words, like how your grief shifts and changes with time, how it shifts and changes with the world's grief, how it changes with the seasons or new losses or new information about old losses. Like there's all these different ways it can change. And I think society has this awful um, uh, missive or message for us that if we're learning new information about something, especially after the fact, that we failed, or we shoulda, coulda, woulda done better, or we didn't have enough information, or something about us was wrong, as opposed to this is what it is to be alive. Literally, the cliche of like you live and you learn. It's like, no, but really, you really actually do live and you learn. And then sometimes you grieve and you learn. And so I just love that this is a part of your experience, is like creating um, the death deck, like with the knowledge that you had, and then creating your other decks with even more information, with even more wisdom, and acknowledging, like, I have this as well. I'm like, my books, I don't know it at the time how they're going to be imperfect, but when they're in the world, someone will tell me what they are missing, what I have forgotten, what I didn't know at the time. Or I'll learn it for myself and be like, dang, I wish I would have put that in one of my things I made or released to the world. And there's a difference between seeing it as having failed in some way and then having learned in some way. And then with the next iteration, you know more, you do better. The goal is to do better. And then as a result, that ripple effect is the people who receive the work you create know better, do better. So I'm going to use that as a segue to get into the decks. Introduce us to now 3 decks that you've created: the Death Deck, the End of Life Deck, and the newest one is the Dementia Deck. Why decks? Like, why decks of cards instead of like a book or a brochure or a podcast, or why that medium? And then tell us maybe what exactly they're for. I think we can guess with the names, but especially for people who have not heard of these before, I'd love like a little tour guide through each of them.
Sure. Yeah. I want to just address one thing. Um, there is so much second guessing in grief. Like, it's so hard, and everyone's second guesses. I've worked as a hospice social worker almost 20 years and done so many bereavement calls and talking to families after the fact. And, you know, it's common to have that second guessing. And sometimes I will have family members tell me, I really wish, I wish my mom would have come onto hospice sooner. I wish, we would have gotten more support sooner. Or I wish we had had these conversations ahead of time so I knew what my mom would want. And, you know, and then I share with them as gently and appropriate as I can, but you still have the opportunity for everyone else in your life, right? And so sometimes those regrets about a personal death and how the effects of how it occurred and some of those things, like, there will be other people in your life who die, and that information can become so valuable for how you can support differently, how you can like advocate for hospice earlier, like all of these things. um, of course it's not always right away that we can come to that point,
Mm-hmm.
but it can help to feel like it's not all lost. Those things you learned are still important and
Yeah.
can be used. So our decks, so this is the death deck. We
Yay,
have our
show and
little
tell. Oh, grief growers, come if you're listening to the podcast, come pause it and watch it on YouTube for a minute so you can see the
yeah,
decks.
so the death deck has our little Scully guy. This was created in 2018, and this was the first deck um, that we created. And so my former business partner, her name's Lori, and her husband's name is Joe. And so we created the deck that Lori wished she could have played with Joe. And so we decided to create a game that uses multiple choice questions and humor. And basically, we were thinking, how do we get people who don't want to talk about death to talk about death? Well,
Mm-hmm.
maybe if we gamify it, maybe if we turn it into, instead of Cards Against Humanity, it's cards about death, right? And we're just looking at all things death related. And so some of the questions are specifically advanced care planning questions, questions about like what you would want for your own death or disposition of your body, how you feel about burial, cremation, human composting, those things. And then some of the questions are just like party game questions. So the idea being that there's lots of different ways that people can enter into the conversation and to lighten up about the topic. This isn't a game to play new in grief necessarily. This is a game to play when you want others to get more comfortable talking about death and dying. I mean, I completely feel like we can't be good at supporting people in grief if we're uncomfortable with death. Like it's just it's so hard to show up for people in grief if we can't talk about death and dying, right? So, the death deck is meant to be a game to start those conversations. And then in 2023, we created the EOL deck, which has a little koala on it. So she's a little more sensitive, a little cuter. The EOL deck was designed specifically for people with serious illness and or advanced age, so people who are approaching end
Mhm.
of life. So instead of having all these fun questions that are, about everything death related, these are very specific questions about how do you feel about touch as you're declining? How do you feel about having visitors? Um, how much information do you want about your disease progression
Mhm.
versus not? So this one really gets into your end of life preferences. And then the dementia deck I just released in September with compassion and choices. And so we this is a tool to help people talk through the type of care and treatment they would want if they were living with dementia. So the idea of this, working with so many hospice families, and my grandma had dementia for 10 years. Um, People are always asking, what can I do so that I don't end up in the same situation as my dad, who maybe was completely bedbound and dependent for 5 years, 10 years. Um, and while we can't necessarily prevent dementia totally, um, there are decisional moments that arise for family members, and talking about what you would want if you were living with dementia can help your family members have some confidence to make those decisions on your behalf. Whether that's living as long as possible because that's your value system and what you think about it, um, or whether it's living as short a time as possible, um, and making decisions that are related to caring for a person, but when those medical decisions come up, that they're going to make decisions that are more aligned with that viewpoint.
Yes, and the person's definition of like what would a full life or a good life look like to you, and only you can answer that question for yourself. I love it. I'm gonna read through just really quickly this I found on your website, Grief Growers. You can go to thedeathdeck.com to find all three of the decks, but to kind of get a feel for like how the questions differ between them. So the death deck is like the first and probably the funniest of them. But one of my favorite questions is fact, you're going to die. How often do you think about this? And then it's A, B, or C. A says often, but I try not to completely obsess about it. B is enough. Sometimes it makes me worry and sometimes appreciate life. And then C, rarely, I'm too busy living. Which is so funny. And if I were to answer that, I would say often, but not, but this is where the conversation opens up. I think about my own death often, not in a way of I'm terrified to go anywhere, but I use it as a motivator to get things done.
Hmm.
My mother's one of her big griefs before her death was feeling like she didn't get to finish everything she wanted to do before she died. She got the news she was dying, and then she died in 7 days, and so the timeline in there was very short. And she got a lot of shit done in 7 days, which was more than I can say for other folks who have experienced even more sudden losses. But there was a lot in life that she didn't get to do, and so I'm very much a person of like you really do not know when you're going to die, and you could die tomorrow, as my friend Kate Manser says. Um, and so you better do your stuff today. It's what's motivated me to put so many books out in the world because I'm like, I don't know when I'm going to go, and I need people to know this before I go. But that's kind of the way it's phrased is funny, and it's also about the question of mortality. The end of life deck, which is questions for preparing for the end of life or reaching the end of your life, whether a terminal diagnosis or old age or both. An example would be in your final days, what would you like to smell, A, B, or C? A is my favorite foods, like fresh baked cookies or coffee. B is calming scents like lavender, rose, or sandalwood. And C is fresh air from an open window. And what I like about this too is there's a hidden invitation to write in your own response. So if you're like, none of the above, D, none of the above, there's definitely an option to write in your own and back to the flowers. I'm like, ooh, freesia, ooh, jasmine, ooh, like some gardenia, heavy scented lily of the valley if it's March or April. Um, would feel great to me. But yeah, whatever it is, not hospital. Like that's one of the big smells that I hate of like alcohol or antiseptic or um latex gloves. Like I just don't like any of those smells. So I'm answering these for myself as we go.
Yeah.
And then the last one that I'll read from the Dementia Deck, uh, the idea of being dependent on others, dot, 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 A, B, or C. A doesn't worry me. I've taken care of family and I know they'll do the same for me. B terrifies me. I hate the idea of losing control. Or C makes me feel guilty. I don't want to be a burden. And I don't know that I have a clear answer for this yet, because I do know that I have people in my life who would take care of me, but I also um, value independence so much. This goes back to that question of like what defines a good life for you, and being mobile and like on the go and like public transit all over Chicago, like that's a high value for me. So I don't know that I would feel guilty or like a burden, but I think I'd be bummed out. But that's my like B and C answer. But I think there are people who would say, "Hey, totally. I don't worry about being dependent on others because sometimes, or I have this belief that it will all come back around, or I've saved so much for retirement and nursing care that I can afford it, or whatever the answer may be." And so, grief goers, you can see like the different flavors of questions that exist even more deeply within each of these decks. And I think each of them have like a hundred and something questions. Am I right?
Um, the
Or
Death
a hundred
Deck
and
has
something cards?
112 questions,
Okay.
so that's our bigger one. The EOL deck is 50, and then the Dementia Deck is 42.
Beautiful.
So I yeah, and I like how you answered all of the questions. I think, you know, we use the multiple choice to give ideas and
Hmm.
people can align with those ideas, but often it turns into I'm between B and C, like you said, or a little bit of that, a little bit of that, or all of the above, or a completely different answer. And and I always will share with people, well, of course, we're not expecting that you will always align with whatever I randomly came up with, right? but
Hmm.
um but they're conversation starters. So, to have some conversations. And I've also had people use the decks as almost journal prompts to just be kind of thinking and reflecting on their own wishes and desires and what's important to them. Um, and, because we don't all have family and friends that are open to having these conversations, and even when we want to. And what I've encouraged people to do is, you know, you can go through the questions on your own. You can also like stack the deck, and which is what I always encourage people to do, which is basically like choose the cards that you think will play best to the group you're going to play with.
Oh,
So,
sure. That was going to be my next question of like, how do you introduce this into like a family or a friend group maybe that has never talked about death or end of life before, and then suddenly you're like, let's play a game. How do you roll that out, or what are some ways to roll that out so it's not so scary?
so one of the things that I encourage people, especially if their family is less reluctant, is use a situation in which you're the guest of honor and then you get to say what is done. So, you know, Mother's Day is coming up. You could
Hmm.
say, you know what, you all have been avoiding me like talking about this topic. I think it's really important as I'm getting older. And we're going to play the death deck today. And that's what we're going to do because it's Mother's Day. Same goes for birthday. Uh, it can be, on Thanksgiving, I'm hosting. And so I say, this is what we're going to do after our Thanksgiving meal. So using for people who are, for families who are a little bit more like reluctant, that's one of my suggestions. The other really is to, um, with all the decks, there's questions that are more abstract, like thoughts, like, what do you think about this topic? Those are easier entry points than like, think about yourself dying. What do we want? Those are
Hmm.
harder to get to. So I encourage people to start from like further out and then kind of work your way in. And again, like we know our people for the most part. And so either removing the cards that you think that's going to turn them off, or like that one's about religion and we fight about that topic, so I'm going to like take that one out.
Sure.
So you can really kind of create the um you can kind of create the experience based on the cards that you choose. But it's life, so you know someone might say something that's completely surprising and take you off on a completely different topic. And you know um but one of the other benefits that I have found playing in all these different settings is um the connection that you feel with people when you're
Hmm.
talking about real topics. And I'm sure you experience that all the time here on the podcast, but like you feel really close to people when you're talking about topics related to life and death, and topics that you don't get a chance to talk about very much, that are held pretty tight. It's really good relationship builders. I have people reach out who say that they bring them on their like third date and kind of use them as a litmus test of like, do we agree enough on some of these topics? Which, I love that idea of bringing it on a third date.
Yes, well, my wife and I joke that we had the longest first date ever and then the longest second date ever. When uh, we met at the Canadian United States border because the borders were closed during COVID, and the only place you could meet was at the border where it was possible for both of you to go home at the end of the day. Um, and our first date was 9 hours. We had a picnic and played We're Not Really Strangers, which is another card game of like question asking. And card games have now just become a staple of our relationship, which I think is true for many people. But our second date was her helping me locate from Washington State to Chicago. And so it was a road trip. It was across the course of several weeks that we were together, and we did the New York Times. I think it's 33 questions to fall in love or something like that. And it's like if you ask these questions of a stranger, and we weren't strangers by that point, but you ask these questions of a stranger, and then at the end you spend 2 full minutes staring into each other's eyes, you're supposed to be able to fall in love. It's like psychologically proven. And it goes from like what's your favorite childhood memory, like at one of the beginning ones, to like uh what's your relationship with your dad, and like one of the more intense ones, or like what's a thing on your bucket list would be one of the lighter ones, and then like what do you fear leaving behind when you die is like one of the deeper ones. And so it has this scale from uh easier, more softball questions to like really deep and philosophical ones. But I think, yeah, absolutely. If it's your birthday, if you're hosting a dinner party, if you're going on a road trip, if you host like community or mutual aid nights, or like benefits or things in your neighborhood, or even a book club, like skip the book 1 month and like do the death deck or the end of life deck or the dementia deck. And it's wild to me, and I love this as a prompt for deeper thinking, because like I have such good friends and family members in my life, and I will know the secret story of the one CD that my friend stole from her sister when she was in middle school, but I have no idea how she wants to die. And one of those things already happened, and one of those things is going to happen. And to your point, the connection, the depth, the clarity, the relationship building that I would get from that is one thing, but then the actual like if and when that day comes and it's her turn before me, like I would love to know how to better take care of her in that or through that. And we all have, I don't know if we all have, but my friend group certainly has like, we hope to get old like the Golden Girls and like all lean on and support each other. But I'm like, I have no idea what that means really for any of us, other than we like the idea of living in a sitcom. And
Right.
so even bringing this every fall, we have a like a vacation we take together for 5 days. We just hole up in a cabin and read and play board games and watch movies and make meals with each other. Like even just setting this in the middle of the table and just leaving it there the whole time and seeing what people dig through and what they ask each other. Like I'm about to do this. I'm about to do this with my friend group. Because yeah, we can know each other's deepest, darkest secrets, but we don't know how we want to die. And and that is so, so crucial. And it's one of the biggest things I think that not just grieving people, but like everyone regrets not knowing in in someone's final days or even after their death? Like, how do they want to be remembered? And sometimes the answer is, I don't know. And so we have to invent our own ways of remembering them, but we don't always know if it's what they would want. And so, like, what a gift to have this clarity before the crisis actually happens, before the death actually happens. I don't have a
Yeah.
question for you, but that's just all my feedback related to that.
Well, I first of all, I need to get my friend group to go away for 5 days in a cabin. Like that sounds magical. I'm actually part of a book club for 22 years now.
Wow.
23? I think we just hit 23 years. And so it's this wonderful group of women, and we came together in our 20s, late 20s, and then yeah, now we're all like 50 and still together. The richness that comes from having like conversations about death, I think there's so many surprises, like um of these things that you don't know about each other, like you were saying.
Hmm.
Um, but one of the other ways to play the death deck is to partner up and guess each other's answers. And
Oh,
so
that's fun.
we have hosted some game nights with couples, and I've hosted game nights with friends, people who are girlfriends who are, just know each other really well. The girlfriends usually do quite a bit better than the couple. So it's
Something worth
interesting.
knowing.
It is something worth knowing. And I think that one of the things that is important about that is if you have chosen your partner to be your healthcare decision maker and they are put in charge of those things, and yet your girlfriend actually knows you better in some ways because of the type of conversations you have with that person, it's worth kind of digging into that because your partner may not always be the best person to make decisions on your behalf. So, sometimes that's because the emotions are too high. Sometimes
Hmm.
it's because you're afraid like they won't let you go if needed, or or they may not be very good advocates, or they're really shut down about having conversations with you about the topic because it's too hard for them to think about it. Um, those are all, kind of, I would say, yellow flags that maybe it's worth kind of looking into, um, for that moment of your life, having a friend be a decision maker,
Hmm.
rather than a partner for those reasons. But um, you have to tell you got to make sure you tell the partner. So
Yeah. Yeah.
I've I've been in situations where because I worked in the ER for 8 years too, and I've been in situations where another person comes in with an advanced directive, but the spouse wasn't aware that this other person was the decision maker, and
Oh, wow.
so that can get a little hairy. Yeah.
Then it turns into like TV drama land.
Yeah. Yeah. Then we're on the pit if we're, calling security or whatever. But
Yeah.
yeah.
I want to know, especially as you've talked about hosting nights with couples and with friends and then other instances or stories, like what have been some of your favorite outcomes of people using any of these decks or like stories that you've heard or witnessed yourself of people bringing these decks into conversations with friends or family?
Yeah, we've gotten some great feedback, and people leaving really heartfelt reviews of like, this helped me so much. I played with my dad and we were able to talk through some of these topics that, we hadn't been able to before. My mom finally made her funeral plans. I've been trying to get her to do that forever. And I brought it into um, my favorite wine bar here in the LA area and was asking people questions just at the bar. And this young couple said, "Oh, can you give us like a handful of questions? We want to kind of go away and talk about,
Mm-hmm.
like, we want to get in this conversation on our own. So they took some of the cards and then they came back after an hour or so, and the woman was like super excited and she said, "Oh my God. Okay, so we've been putting off doing our trust because we were fighting over who to give guardianship of our kid." And so they had come to a decision after, like, one of the
Wow.
cards prompted them. And then there just happened to be an estate attorney like sitting there at the bar who was like, "Oh, are you interested?"
I'll give you my card right now. I'll meet with you Monday.
They ended up like making an appointment with this guy. They had known each other. So yeah, that felt really good because I got to see it all unfold.
Wow.
Usually it's like after the fact, people will, shoot me an email or something and tell me that the card helped them with their family. But that was like action happening.
You start to finish in less than a few hours. That's
I
incredible.
did. Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
incredible. I absolutely love it. Have you made, going back to our conversation earlier about when you know better, you do better, and there's not really such a thing as failure when you're learning about grief. Have you made any changes to the death deck, the EOL deck, the dementia deck? Like, have you, as you've learned more or partnered with different people to create the questions?
Yeah, we made some changes to the death deck. We've made several. Early on, we had a couple questions that pushed the limits too much. But both Lori and I found ourselves not asking that question when we were like playing the game with other people. We would skip over it.
Mm-hmm.
It was a question about suicide, which we then changed to what celebrity suicide has impacted you the most.
Mm.
But it was more of a question about like your thoughts on suicide, and it was just a little too triggering for a card. We decided not to continue with the question. Uh, and then I think that was the only one that was like, we felt like we really kind of missed the mark in the first printing. And
Mm-hmm.
then we've made some updates that, because human composting wasn't necessarily a thing when we first started
Sure.
the deck. So so
Now
we
you can
made
be
it
dirt or a tree if you want.
right, right. So there's been a couple more, a couple advancements in death, if you will.
Sure. Yes. Well, and I live in a state, I live in Illinois, but there's talk all the time, at least here in the US, about medical aid in dying as a potential option for end of life care. And it's true in some countries, it's not true in others, and it's becoming truer, it seems, every day. And so I imagine that would be an element of the question asking too, of like, if this is an option, do you want to pursue it? Um, yeah.
Yes, we have questions about medical aid in dying in both the EOL deck and the death deck.
Yeah, that's very cool. I love knowing that, and it's a permission slip to keep growing and changing as the world of death and end of life keeps growing and changing. There are questions I think that can be evergreen, of like this could always be significant when it comes to somebody dying or important to ask. And then there's just like the way in which we die or the conversations we have about um yeah, end of life care in our country and beyond, that change the way the deck is written and shared.
Yeah, yeah. I think the next printing of the death deck will include some AI questions, or I might
Oh,
even do a
sure.
supplemental um, of just like 20, 25 more questions to add. Um, because there's now we have AI and so much digital aspect of like planning ahead that isn't really we yeah wasn't really a thing in
Yeah.
2018.
Yes.
But yeah.
And I have friends and family members are like, if you dare create like an AI hologram representation for me, I will haunt you. And I have other people who are like, sure, put my voice into Chat GPT, I'll write a song with you. And I'm like, oh my gosh, this is so also not who I was expecting to say different things, which is really funny. But also as a person who creates things on the internet, I'm like, I'll leave you with what I would like to leave you with. I'm in the don't create a hologram of me camp. Um,
Yeah.
but yeah, I know for sure there are people who are like saving voice memos with the intention of having them turn into a whole. It's possible for them to read their grandchildren's stories with the use of AI in their voice, which is wild to me. So yeah, I mean, it's changing every day, and it sounds like your deck and kind of your social media platform and the work that you do to get the word out about these conversations is morphing along with it. Again, never failure, just more learning, more information, more
Yeah.
questions worth asking.
Yeah, absolutely. If we and just thinking about this podcast and how in 5 years, listening to this podcast of us like talking about AI and grief, and in 5 years, oh my God, it'll be so different than like what our thoughts are now, because of the ways in which all of this is changing so quickly.
Mhm.
This will probably feel really sweet that we're talking about.
Oh, precious. Yeah, I'm a little afraid of that future. Yeah. Well, as we wrap up our conversation today, tell people, I think I mentioned the website already, but tell people where they can find all of the decks. And then I'm going to write a blog that corresponds with this podcast about how to have hard conversations about death, end of life, and dementia, and definitely talk about you and all three of the decks throughout. So tell people where they can find you and your work if they are ready to buy a deck.
Yeah. Well, thank you again, Shelby, for having me on and being a community with the grief growers. You can find me at thedeathdeck.com. You can also follow me on social media at the Death Deck. It is me, so anytime you're reaching out, I am the person that you're hearing back from. And yeah, and you can also email me at Lisa at the Death Deck.
I love it. Lisa, thank you so much for coming on Grief Grower, reminding us what it is to be a grief grower. I would love yearly reminders of that or more often. And for creating these decks, for really making it so much easier to have hard conversations about the hardest things of our lives.
Thank you again for having me.
That's all for this episode of Grief Grower. Thank you so much for joining me and Lisa today. Again, if you'd like to get 20% off any or all of the card decks we mentioned today, just enter code GRIEF20, GRIEF 20, on her website, thedeathdeck.com. You can find a link to that in the show notes. If you're looking for grief support beyond the show, you can also find free workshops, blog articles, and my new book, Of Course I'm Here Right Now, 3 actually helpful things to say to someone grieving, at shelbyforsythia.com/links. And if you'd like to get support from me for your unique loss experience, you can join me at any time in Life After Loss Academy. You get my 5-step grief framework for rebuilding after loss, plus live coaching with me every single week to answer your questions. If this podcast felt validating, comforting, educational, or otherwise helpful to you, please subscribe and leave a review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. And be sure to share Grief Grower with a friend, because you never know what someone you love is going through, or what kind of card game they might like to play. Grief Grower is hosted by me, Shelby Forsythia, with theme music by Addie Goldstein. Until next time, Grief Growers, I see you. I am so proud of you and the work that you're doing in the world, and I love you. Because even through grief, we are growing.